The Energy Transition Podcast takes you directly to the cutting edge of the global energy sector's shift, with a specific focus on the critical role played by oil and gas, as well as the pathways developing around a lower carbon future. Your hosts, Leslie Beyer, Energy Workforce and Technology Council's CEO, and Dan Pickering, founder of Pickering Energy Partners, are joined by Josh Lowry, president of Upright Digital. Each episode engages industry thought leaders in an exploration of market-moving trends and topics, including new technologies, ESG, capital markets, inclusion and diversity, workforce innovation, regulatory influences, and the voice of the people. Join us as the Energy Transition Podcast looks at the state of the traditional energy and oil field service sectors, emerging technologies, and the path ahead in a world of lower carbon energy development.
Welcome to the Energy and Transition Podcast. My name is Josh Lowry. We are coming to you live from Houston, Texas in the Flecha Azul Podcast studio. I am joined, I would say as normal or with the co-host extraordinaire, but we have a guest co-host extraordinaire who has been with us before on one of our other podcasts as a guest, but not as a guest host, Mr. Tim Tarpley with the Energy Workforce and Technology Council. How are you, Tim?
Doing well. Good to be here, Josh.
Are you excited to be a co-host today rather than a guest?
I am very excited because I get to ask the questions.
It's much easier to be a host than it is a guest.
I'm looking forward to it.
Last time you were with us, it was straight during COVID, and you were on the 0360 podcast with us, kind of updating us on some, really what was going on with PPP and a lot of like the world of during the craziness. What have you been up to? I mean, I know that's been 18 months, 24 months. What have you been up to?
Well, obviously the policy world has changed dramatically. The energy industry is back. I mean, we're the oil and gas industry is back. We are getting a lot of engagement from DC. They want to talk to us again, which is great. But it's also kind of a little bit of reminding them, hey, we've been here the whole time. You can't just come to us when you feel like you need us. So we've been busy. In fact, I was just up in DC on Monday. Meeting with DOE, talking about ways we can increase domestic production to support our allies in Europe. There's a lot of concern, obviously, about this winter and whether or not our European allies have the supplies of natural gas that they're going to need to get through the winter. So
we'll go. I know we have a guest in the room. I like to leave our guests on red, as they call it, as the millennials call it, as long as possible here. But throughout this interview, I would love to touch on how the council is really ramped up their policy efforts and what you guys have done, because it's a lot. You guys have always done a lot, but as you said, it's I don't know if it's ever been more important, really, the meshing of traditional versus energy, the transition, if you want to call that, so of how they blend. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opportunities in this interview to talk about that stuff, but should we bring him in or just keep him here for a little bit longer?
Let's take him off red. I'll go ahead and introduce our guest today. It should be a great discussion. Tim Matthews, he is like a board member of the Carbon Neutral Coalition and is CEO of Cozairo Corporation, a Houston-based CCS company founded in 2021. He has 20 years of experience in a variety of technical project, business development, and leadership roles, all within the energy sector. Tim, it's great to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So before
I should let you know, Cozairo is how it's pronounced, and I did not tell you that. So
Cozairo.
Yeah.
Where does it come from?
Cozairo is so this is a kind of a geeky start, but I love theology, and starting off in my when I started the pivot into energy transition, I knew we wanted to deal with the CO2 issue. I knew that was where our skill set, me and my co-founders, where we sat. So COZ and CO2 look real similar, and arrow in biblical Greek, arrow means put away, so that's put away CO2, and that's how geeky it is.
That's where it started. Strong name. That's great.
So that's what it means, to put away CO2.
Okay.
I mean, can we just stop the podcast now? I feel like that encompasses a lot, right? Have you ever done a podcast before?
I have not.
Well, you've come to the right one to start with.
I think so.
So before we get going on this too, I was looking, you mentioned a lot of stuff that you've done, but Tim, did you have a chance to look at the other board members that he's a part of on this
I did.
Carbon Neutral Coalition?
It's an impressive group.
It's very impressive.
It really is. There's you drew the short straw today, because there's some real heavy hitters on that board. It's a terrific group of folks. A lot from energy sector, but it's broad spectrum. It's not everybody is just energy. Corby Robertson pulled that team together, with the objective of trying to make sure that particularly Texas was competitive as we move into energy transition space. It's a group of folks, not all from energy, but everybody in that team appreciates the importance that the energy sector has, both in the United States and in Texas specifically, to the economy. So they're looking to make sure that rather than being left behind in the transition, the energy sector is leading it, and that's what they want to do, particularly in Texas.
We had actually Bobby Tudor is one of your fellow board members on that. He was here last week actually, and that was a nice interview for him. Or we had a nice interview with him, I should say. And but I didn't really look at the group until I went back and studied you. It's very diverse. It's very oriented to Texas and Houston. The Roberson family's been around here a long time. I like to see that, and I know that Leslie is, very adamant that Houston is going to play a key role in the solution. And I have changed my opinion on the energy in transition and the energy transition. And I'm an oil and gas guy, right? That's what I came from, and I am still. But man, I've really become a big proponent of the studying and the learning of the transition. And I love to see guys and families like the Robersons and your family and your group and the Tudors and all these people that are smart, traditional, incumbent, as actually Bobby Tudor calls it, getting involved in this. Because if you're not getting involved in this and learning about it, you're going to be left behind. And I don't want that for a lot of our, I'm sure, mutual friends and colleagues.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's important. There's a number of, in the 20 years I was in upstream oil and gas, the relationships and that I built in that sector, there's so many folks that are skilled and care about this issue, and there's a level of concern in the, I guess, the incumbents, as Bobby called it. There's a level of concern that if the company or companies that you're in don't have a strategy to pivot, they're not ready to act, then that's not going to affect not only the company's welfare, but the welfare of the folks that are in those companies. And so I think there's even a groundswell within corporate America and upstream oil and gas to encourage leadership in the oil and gas sector to make sure that it's more than words, so that there's a strategy that's being enacted.
And Tim, I'm totally crushing your preparation here. You can tell which Tim's done all this prep work and I'm killing it. But when you say groundswell in corporations, do you almost even mean in the employees of corporations?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah. That's what I've seen in my group.
Well, what do you think about, so obviously when you with the goal of carbon neutrality, you have kind of two competing interests. You have everybody wants to get there, but on the flip side, energy demand is also increasing all around the world. So how do you do that? How do you achieve carbon neutrality at the same time that you have energy demand increasing? You have folks in India and China and Southeast Asia. They want to live a middle class lifestyle. They want to drive cars. They want to have everything we have. So that's going to continue. That demand's going to continue. How do you reach carbon neutrality with that going on at the same time? Those two competing interests.
Yeah, I think the way that globally we're heading is the way to get there, which is there's a realization that there's not one home run that's going to solve the problem,
right?
That there's nothing that's going to happen immediately, that we're not going to be rescued from the challenge, and we have a trillions of dollars in energy infrastructure that's brought prosperity, and I have seen that both personally and globally in communities in which companies I've worked with operate. Things are different when the energy situation changes for the better. So I don't think that we have any hope of moving in the direction of carbon neutrality unless we acknowledge at the same time that you can't drop everything that we've done. Mm-hmm. We've got we've got to move in the direction of carbon neutrality, taking advantage of investments that have already been made, of skill sets that have already been built, and that's where I think the CCS component of the kind of there's, if you look at four legs of a stool, maybe there's renewable. We need to move to renewable power. We need to switch to fuels that are low carbon. We need CCS to capture emissions from existing energy sources rather than releasing them. And these elements, together with efficiencies in existing processes, if all four of those don't work in combination, I think personally it's very difficult for me to see how we could make progress. If you're willing to invest in all four simultaneously, I think you can maintain quality of life, you can maintain energy infrastructure that exists, and therefore make sure that we're taking care of the folks that need it today, but not staying stagnant.
So how does the Carbon Neutral Coalition fit into all this? Tell me a little bit about the organization, its goals, and how you're trying to move forward with that.
Okay. The Carbon Neutral Coalition, as you mentioned already, it's a terrific group of diverse backgrounds, businesses and industries across the spectrum. It's an upstream oil and gas focus, but there's multiple industries represented. It's bipartisan. It's not a political movement at all. And the objective of the Carbon Neutral Coalition is simply to make sure that, particularly in Texas, where the oil and gas sector has been so important to the health and development of the state, that it's ready to transition that the oil and gas sector is ready to transition and compete in a new environment, and the environment where oil and gas is a major but not the only solution to energy needs. So that's what we're doing with the Carbon Neutral Coalition, is working up policy proposals that we can then lobby with the legislature in Texas to make sure that Texas stays competitive.
Did I hear that right, that you're saying that with the focus of oil and gas being a major component of that transition?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, the intent is, it's a recognition, and one of the things that I appreciate most about being involved in the Carbon Neutral Coalition is there's an appreciation that all of the skill sets needed to transition to the new energy economy exist in upstream oil and gas. So that's where you go. That should be the engine of the transition, should come from upstream oil and gas and downstream oil and gas, the whole sector. And that's what they're acknowledging is, hey, we've got this extreme strength in Texas in this sector. How do we make sure that rather than it being dispersed, Texas can be a place where this centralized expertise, centralized capability is actually deployed in parallel to continuing to supply oil and gas energy via oil and gas, and to making sure that that's a cleaner and cleaner process for Texas and obviously the U.S. economy as well.
Can I just step back on a question I probably jumped ahead of early on, because that espresso hit me right when we started talking. But you seem to have, and I'm looking at your bio. You come from the oil and gas business, so you're coming from that foundation into the world of carbon neutrality, right? What was your experience upstream? You're an upstream guy?
Yes, I was upstream 20 plus years, upstream oil and gas. I had the opportunity to work really across the upstream value chain, so exploration, development, projects, production, marketing, gas and power, distribution. So that's my background, and that's where I think I've been blessed with the opportunity to see skill sets across that upstream spectrum that apply directly whether you're in the power sector or whether you're in the exploration sector or anywhere in between, one or more of those four legs of the energy transition stool is touched on. So that's where I felt like this was it's a very natural step for me, and my hope is that you can see it in some of the energy companies seeing that and making the move, and also energy professionals doing the same.
Well, and that's so important because when you talk about Texas being the leader in energy, we have the intelligence here. We have the background folks that have really done these kind of projects at scale, and then we also have the physical infrastructure. So it makes sense that we continue to lead, the energy industry in whatever direction that goes. I've had some conversations with some policymakers, maybe on the who generally are against the oil and gas industry, who have said that they are opposed to CCS for that very reason, because it's going to extend, fossil fuel infrastructure. But they're starting to come around. I've noticed, with the energy security debate that has happened over the past couple months, some of those folks that maybe used to be in that camp are starting to come around. Have you seen that as well? And maybe there's a little bit more, a little bit more ability of those folks to come and back to oil and gas and say, okay, we understand what you have to offer in this debate. Come join us. Are you seeing that as well?
To some extent, I have.
Yeah.
And that's encouraging that you say you're seeing that too,
Yep.
because I think the lead will come from policymakers like it does in the fiscal setting.
Right.
So the fact that you're seeing that is a big encouragement to me.
Right.
The views that you describe, whether it's far left or far right,
Yep.
I think hurt.
Right.
They on either side of the aisle, they hurt the transition. And so when as you move towards both a visionary and pragmatic view of the energy transition, I think you can get somewhere where you have the goals are aggressive. They will require investment. They will come at a cost that society needs to be willing to pay. That's the vision piece. But for the cost to be minimized, for the transition to be successful and not come at great personal as well as national cost, requires some pragmatism. And I think whether you're center left or center right, you can start to get I think you can get your arms around those dual objectives. And so I'm glad that you're seeing it.
Right.
That tells me if you're seeing that, we'll start seeing that very shortly in the business sector as you're trying to build projects. You should start to see some of that.
Speaking of policymakers, so Inflation Reduction Act, President just signed it yesterday. One of the things I always hear about CCS is the technology is there, it's getting better every year, it's just not economical. So maybe the government needs to come in and bridge that gap and make it economical. And some folks will say, well, we shouldn't be picking winners and losers. But the truth is, the government has spent trillions of dollars on supporting different kinds of energy. CCUS seems like it's a really good bet. So there's some changes to 45Q in the Inflation Reduction Act, increases the payments that the government will make. Do you think that's going to be enough to bridge the gap? Do you see investment really flowing into CCS in the coming years because of this?
I think the Inflation Reduction Act is something of a game changer in the U.S. for CCS. The difference between, in the previous administration, they finalized the 45Q at $50 a ton. Mm-hmm. That opened up a subset of projects in the U.S. But if you're thinking about kind of in the U.S., how many places can you do CCS? Mm-hmm. That was there. Maybe less than 100 projects would be purely economic at $50 a ton. At $85 a ton, you've gone up into the thousands of potentially economic projects. So that's what it does, is it makes the target box, if you're looking at an economic proposition as a business that needs to make sustainable investments, it goes from being either a pure cost or a subsidized cost to, in many cases, being at least a cost neutral or even small return generating opportunity. So I do think, since in the companies that we talk with at Cozairo, across sectors, it's methanol, it's ammonia, it's hydrogen, renewable diesel, you see they're all looking at carbon reduction, and they're trying to make a decision about what's a prudent investment for their business and when. And what this will do, I think, is two things. One is it moves a lot of them from subsidized cost to moderate return or better. So it'll move it from competing with ESG type, pure ESG plays to competing for capital with some of the investments they might otherwise make. Great move. That will flood the market with potential opportunities, I think. So I think that transition is really important, and it doesn't solve all of the problems. You can't decarbonize every site.
Right.
Sectors like power gen, which is more than a quarter of U.S. point source emissions of total emissions come from power gen. That's going to be case by case how that looks. Refining, similar, but these are very large sectors that are now in play, whereas they wouldn't have been in play 2 months ago or 2 weeks ago.
What else does the government need to do? I mean, I hear permitting is a big issue for some of these projects. There's the potential that we could see a federal permitting reform package come, in the fall. I'm not so optimistic. I think the politics may not line up there. But is that another issue with a lot of these projects? Is really getting the permitting in a timely manner?
I think that is an issue. For CCS specifically, Class 6 permitting is if you can go through that timely, 18 months is a reasonable expectation for how long it takes. And that's if you're lined up and you kind of have if you know what you're doing and you have your ducks lined up. The EPA has not historically been set up to receive hundreds of Class 6 well applications, which is what I expect it will receive. With this change. So I think there is a permitting step that the federal government and in states that are taking on primacy, like Louisiana, where the state governments will need to be able to staff up the permitting organizations to make this go. But I wouldn't say permitting necessarily has, in my mind at least, and in my experience, has been a red flag. It's just it's not as quick as you'd like it to be. Right. But if you do your business well, then it's okay. There's only two CCS projects in the U.S. that are pure CCS. Everything else is EOR. One's in Wyoming, Chute Creek, ExxonMobil Chute Creek, and then there's the ADM Decatur plant in Illinois. Those two are the only two pure CCS plays at the moment. I was involved with the Chute Creek permitting and design, and that was a process. It wasn't a quick process, but it wasn't an insurmountable issue. So I kind of see permitting as being a facilitator. That's an enabler that I think it'd be great when the federal government and state governments can make some steps to simplify and to smooth that over. It's only going to help. But the real issue has been whether or not a project is an economic value proposition, or can a company really afford to deploy that much capital into something that's not return generating? And so I think they've addressed that more effectively with this change and with the IRA.
So go ahead, Tim.
No, go ahead.
Well, really, if you were going to move on from that point, I don't know if you are or not. I just want to make sure, I don't know if I mentioned this on air or off air, that's one of the specialties of the workforce is how much time and attention that Tim and Leslie and the entire team are paying attention to the policy changes. So I said I wanted to make a special note that if you truly, I don't know how much the audience is aware of how much work the energy workforce is actually doing in this front on the policy side. So for more information, just make sure you go check out the LinkedIn or Tim Tarpley's website. So that's your only plug I'm giving you today, Tim, but it is important that the people listening do understand because this is a complex issue. There's a lot of, you can turn on any news channel and get whichever positive or negative opinion you want to hear. And at some point, it's just about, can we decipher this information to figure out what we're looking at? And I know that you guys are doing a good job. So I just wanted to point that out, Tim, because you're deep in it.
Thanks, Josh. And I mean, also, I think it's really important to remind folks, especially policymakers up in DC, is hey, when you're coming up with these programs, that the companies that you may think are traditionally oil and gas, the companies that have this technology that are out doing this work are companies that are members of our council. And that's really important to remind.
Well,
remind
and
folks.
Again, this is the whole point of this podcast. This is when I get excited. Yeah. Is like it's not just people. ESG, you mentioned it. Like those are the early terms, right? Those are the things that kind of got this thing turned, and that's the things that either turned people on or turned people off to whatever we're talking about now. And ultimately, that's just I think that's the entry level to some of the things we're talking about, and it is people that like you, Tim, that is that have experience in oil and gas and all the different segments that are saying no, we're the guys that are and guys, girls that are making these decisions today, or helping make these decisions in both policy and in infrastructure, et cetera. That we understand both past, present, and we want to help a future. So I just really do want the audience to understand that, because we are. Listen, I just saw the stats yesterday, Tim. We're huge in DC. We're huge in DC, and I know they're listening, and I want them to understand that this is. These aren't just talking heads. That these are actual people with boots on the ground that understand these intimately what we're trying to do here. So.
Yeah, and everybody's on the same team. We're all on the same team here. The world needs energy. The United States needs energy. We need to make it cleaner. We got solutions here. We need to all get on the same page. That's important. Speaking of getting on the same page, I want to talk a little bit about Texas specifically. Obviously, Carbon Neutral Coalition, your Texas-based organization. How is this state doing? How is your relationship with the Railroad Commission and other folks at the state level? What do we need to do at the state level to really continue to be a leader in a lot of these?
That's a great question. I'm very interested in that.
Yeah. I think there's a number of things we would like to help the state move towards, and I guess the context would be there's the economic proposition is the main hurdle to jumping into this space, and that's being addressed at the federal level primarily.
Right.
But state by state, there's a lot of levers that can be pulled to make a difference between if you have a project, where do you want to do that project? Right. One of them is where do you have the skill sets to do it? Texas is very well placed already, so we don't really need to address that issue. Where the Carbon Neutral Coalition is working very, very well, I think, with the legislative bodies, and the connections in the legislature is to build out some proposals for how to facilitate or incentivize projects in Texas. There's some tax-related, state and local tax-related incentives that could be applied.
Right.
Even within there's some existing tax laws and provisions that could be pretty easily adjusted to be broad enough to affect projects like CCS or hydrogen.
Right.
So some of them are tax related, some of them are permitting related. You mentioned the Railroad Commission, so we would be very supportive, are very supportive, and are pushing for Texas to seek primacy the way Louisiana has. Mm-hmm. We do think that that's another example of where Texas already has all the skill sets needed to responsibly permit projects like these. And so why not have Texas projects be managed in Texas? That's kind of a no-brainer for us, and our view would be that's an easy win and a facilitation for pace. So that's another one related to some tax incentives, some policy incentives. I would like to see Texas consider, this is personal now, and I would love to see us also look at how we might incentivize the switching to blue fuels. That's a CCS. It's close to my heart because it's if Cozairo is CCS centric, then and we are, then the immediate adjacency is if you want to make a fuel blue, you need to capture that CO2 and put it away. But the switching to hydrogen is a major opportunity that, because of how Texas is distributed, into the emitters are distributed.
Right.
There's an opportunity to address some of what's maybe the main issue with a hydrogen economy, which is how do you move energy in a hydrogen form. And so in Texas, you have, because of the concentration of emitters, you have an opportunity to minimize that transportation cost. And therefore, Texas is going to be a natural logistical, have logistical advantages in moving to hydrogen. But it's still something that needs to be incentivized. And I think the state can do that too. So I'm hopeful that as we move forward, it may not be in the first round of incentives that we're able to win support for in the legislature. I would still like to see us do that at some point.
What does the Railroad Commission, are they receptive to these kind of conversations, or?
I'm not privy to exactly where the conversation is with the Railroad Commission. There is definitely conversation about it. They, I think, are interested in doing so, from what I've gathered, but it's not as simple as we would all like it to be.
Sure.
Going to get primacy and figuring out, well, who's the right state body. I'm not sure that there's 100% alignment that the Railroad Commission is the right one to be, but they have all the skill sets. So it's kind of there's some hurdles to overcome that we find to be urgent issues, because right now, if you were going to do a CCS project, then all else being equal, you do it in Louisiana, because Louisiana's ahead on primacy. They're ahead on containment liability. That's another thing that they've offered a solution to the industry for containment liability. And they've even set, for their own lands, they've set some expectations for what a reasonable cost of sequestration should be. So there's elements that are where they just have established, it's not so much incentives, it's just some certainty around what would your project look like. And if you have a place where you don't know what it will look like, and you have a place where you do,
right,
you're going to go where you know what it looks like, even if it's not the terms you want. You can count on those, and you can't count on these.
Can you, on the containment liability issue? I know I've read a lot about it. Can you just let our listeners know what that means?
Yeah, sure. So
in a practical sense.
Yeah, good point. So the issue, of course, when you're putting CO2 away is, if you're going to put it away, it has to be permanent. And so the question that raises the question: if you put CO2 away, under what does permanent mean? How long do you keep it there, and how long do you have to monitor it to make sure it stays there? And what happens if, heaven forbid, you lose containment?
Right.
Particularly when the federal government is incentivizing you to make sure it's permanent.
Right.
So that's the issue with liability: is how do we ensure them against containment loss, and how do you also monitor them properly to make sure they stay where they're supposed to be? And so in Louisiana, they've talked about the state taking on liability for containment of CO2 10 years after a project stops, so that if you're going into the business, and I'm thinking a company like Cozairo is very interested in that, because we go into the business of sequestering, we're taking on, we know how to do it responsibly, we're taking on the liability and happy to do so, because that's a risk we can manage. But if you're monitoring something for 100 years or 500 years, it just becomes practically unreasonable.
Right.
And so Louisiana's solved that problem, or offered a solution to that problem. That's the kind of thing that just the certainty around how does that work makes a great deal of difference when you're talking with a potential project emitter and trying to offer a solution that says, we can take care of your carbon, we can sequester it. In our case, we do it right on site. So those are projects where we capture it on site and we put it right underground, right underneath the site. And so that has a lot of simplicity. There's no pipelines. It's attractive in that respect to emitters. But the question comes back to, well, how do you ensure that when I get a tax credit, one, are you going to keep it in the ground? And two, are you insured against the possibility that you are not?
Right. And
for how long? So those are the issues Louisiana's done, I think, a nice job of addressing. If Texas follows suit, we're going to be much better placed to see projects that the same projects progressing in Texas as we do in Louisiana.
Well, I guess that's a call to arms to the legislator. Let's get this going.
Yeah. And this, and again, just kind of following up on some of the previous podcasts that we've had on the show, what you're talking about, just the capturing forever, it's been a topic. So if people want more information, we've actually touched on that topic in other podcasts. So just kind of refer back to some earlier guests as well for some deeper conversation there too. But you're right, that's something that when you're talking about that, they were actually talking about the different the structures underneath and how do they go and where do they how far away do they move away from the original structure, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting also in that there is an element of I guess the philosophy that you have about how you're going carbon neutral that also influences this. When we look at Europe, the opportunity they aren't blessed with the same geology that the United States is, but they're not devoid of it. There's many places in Europe where you could take the same approach, and where we're looking at putting CO2 in the ground directly beneath emitting sites. It's a great opportunity for them too, but there is a perspective in Europe that says the answer can't be blue, it needs to be green. And the idea the idea of blue as a transition to green is much more palatable in the United States than it is in Europe. And so that's an issue that we're kind of facing depending on where we are in the world. Is blue a transition solution that allows something it's a today solution, so you don't have to wait 20, 30 years to get that economic mega scale green project. That's our view would be, hey, do something now.
Yeah.
It doesn't preclude doing the thing you want to do at the end. We'd love to be all green.
So
Sure.
I just want to jump on that to me. I've told Leslie and I've told Dan Pickering, who's the other host we have, and Tim today, that I'm the real winner of this podcast because I actually get to be the consistent person in this seat while everybody comes, because everyone's busy except for me, so it's great. But I get to hear these different guests come in and talk about this, and one of the guests said almost what you're saying there is that look, the problems that we face today aren't going to be solved tomorrow. He said some of these are 50-year problems. He said so the job that we have today is to move it to the next level, and then that's a 5-year issue, that's a 10-year issue, and some of the problems that we have are solutions that come up. That's a solution that can't be done until steps 4 through 7 are done, right? And and also the money needed and the infrastructure. And I mean, just go down the list of policy or whatever you want to, whatever legitimate reason or obstacle that's in the way needs to be taken care of. And as he was explaining this, you just get an idea of the vastness of what we're trying to solve. But at the same time, there is no reason to not start moving. Why? The first thing you said, is this a blue problem or is this a green problem? The best thing that I had ever heard on any of these podcasts when oil was, just coming out of the minus $40, that low point of 2020, the guy said, we don't have a green problem, we have a red problem. And I thought that was a very witty comment about where we really are with oil and gas. And ultimately, it is the solutions that all of us want. Everybody wants clean air, clean water, children to grow up in healthy environments, et cetera. But we have to start. And what you're describing is we have to start these projects, we have to start this policy, we have to do this. And I don't want the audience to hear these things and think, well, that's not in my lifetime. Why would I worry about that? And the reality is because that's what our job is to do. That's our job. We are here to do, we're smart people. We have a saying within our company that smart people do smart things. So I really want to encourage those listening that don't believe in this, that maybe are skeptics, et cetera. It's time to understand that we are not going to solve all of these issues in your entire career. But if you push back hard enough, we're not going to solve any of them. And then you're going to wake up and believe me, if anybody who wants to send me hate mail, whatever, that's fine. I don't read emails anyway, so it's perfect. We are in a position now where these things need to be addressed with smart people doing these things. And I really, when I hear you talk about that, that's the point that as me, I have no dog in this fight, right? My goal is to get as many people to hear your story as possible. And that to me is the best point, is that we have to start this thing and get people to understand that we have there's a long road ahead of us, and we have to start all of these projects now.
Yeah, I think that.
Sorry, I'm off my soapbox.
I think that's great. I couldn't agree more. That the as a new industry, this is the energy transition isn't a sector; it's kind of a philosophy. But as it's spurring these new industries.
Correct.
There's a green hydrogen industry that's sort of coming to the fore. There's a CCS sector that's emerging, and one thing that I hope we can do differently, and certainly we are very much in Cozairo, this is how our view of the world is, the scope of this opportunity to help with emissions reduction, to decarbonize, is absolutely mind-boggling in scale. And everyone's heard the numbers, but depending on how you do the math, it's tens, hundreds of trillions
Correct.
Of dollars that there's an opportunity here that the world is interested in pursuing. And so when you can run at that competitively and run into the space thinking, I want blue to win, or I want green hydrogen to win, or I want solar power to win, and completely miss the point, which is that if my friend in solar and my buddy in green hydrogen, if they don't win with me, we all lose.
I want my oil and gas friend to win.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone's got to win.
Absolutely.
The world needs energy. The world is
Right.
That
is a great point.
Yeah.
So it's just not, it's a different I think we need a different mindset. And so we should be cheering on new oil developments that are carbon sensitive. We should be cheering on solar developments that work and make sense. Wind. I mean, other CCS projects, I'm excited when I see a CCS project go. And not because we didn't win it, but because it's like, hey, that's what we need. We need these to be working everywhere.
Right. Yeah. Our market is growing.
Yeah.
It's working.
Right.
It's such a good point, Tim. I think that's one of the big mistakes that the energy industry as a whole has done, on the policy side over the past 30 or 40 years, is it's always been a us versus them. It's been, solar's getting a tax credit. Well, we're going to attack that because we didn't get, it doesn't need to be that way. We need all energy. Because energy demand is only increasing, and it shouldn't be that us versus them mentality. We need to work better together as the energy industry, and I think you hit it right on the head. We were talking briefly about Europe. Do you think you've seen a change in the European perceptions of technology like this? Certainly, the energy crunch they're in right now because of the Ukraine crisis. In fact, they're in some areas of Europe they're turning back on coal plants. So I always kind of laugh at that. Is that's what they've found themselves in, is they have to fire up the coal plant again. But do you see maybe a little bit of a change in their perceptions of things like CCUS, and they're maybe coming back around and saying, hey, we need to take a second look at this?
We're not as well plugged in Europe yet as we are here.
Yep.
But we have a number of partners and folks that we're talking with in Europe about projects. Mm-hmm. And I do think that I can, even in the segment we're in, I can see a shift to an openness. And what I see is a shift in an openness to thinking about it differently, because the crisis is real, and they're in a situation none of us would ever want to be in.
Right.
Entirely reliant on a regime that you can't rely on for the bulk of your energy, and so I think that the pragmatic reality is, if you do want to jump to green in Europe, that's a really hard row to hoe and get off your dependence on Russian gas. That's the slow play against a very imminent, urgent need. And so
right.
I do think that there will be an openness to thinking about things differently and more creatively, just because of that, including, well, what solutions can we implement immediately? How do I get carbon neutral LNG cargoes into Europe? How do I generate hydrogen-based clean power, whether it's blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, whether it's blue ammonia or green ammonia. How do I convert, if you're firing up coal plants in Europe, as you say, then I don't know how long it will be before they start thinking about it the way Japan's thinking about it, which is, well, if I'm stuck with coal, then how about I start blending ammonia and get my carbon intensity down with blue ammonia, because I can do that soon, whereas green ammonia I probably can't do it as soon generally. Right. So I think there is going to be opportunity. It's unfortunate the situation that people like you and I are in, and where they're just paying unreasonable energy prices just to keep their lights on.
Right.
But I think that'll inspire some more real imminent solutions, and that's one of the advantages of CCS is there's no technology to wait on.
Right, and there's an opportunity for the United States there. We have a lot of that technology. Our companies are building a lot of that technology. We can help out our friends in Europe and then politically, hopefully, pull them away from being dominated by being held hostage by the Russians. Mm-hmm. We can get them off that. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Tim, I have hijacked your beautiful questionnaire. I don't know where are we in this thing? He's so organized, and I know he did a good job on this, and I'm like, man, I think I've screwed this question up. I don't know where we are. I'm loving the conversation, but
we've hit most of the pre-questions, so we are in
free flow. Thank God we got there finally, because I didn't know where we were. I wanted to know. Let me go, because I was actually looking at this. I want to know more about Cozairo. Like, I know where the name came from. Love the name. But, like, what exactly are you guys going to be doing then?
Yeah. So we formed entirely with the premise that outside upstream oil and gas, no sector really has the skill sets in-house to decarbonize via CCS. So our technical team, scientists, engineers primarily, are tasked with going outside of upstream oil and gas. We're out talking with sectors where they don't have access to this expertise or know how to get a CCS project from conception to operations. And so that's our mission. So as I mentioned earlier, I think we have focused on that target box, 45Q at $50. We started with folks where we thought they could have an economic value proposition. So we're helping companies in the ammonia sector, high CO2 concentration. But we've also branched out, because not everyone's looking at it as a pure economic decision. Some are saying, hey, there's a license to operate issue here. In 20 years' time, if I need to have a low carbon solution, I can't start looking at it in year 19. I really do have to start figuring it out right now. It doesn't mean I have to pull the trigger on the $100 million or the $900 million or whatever dollar project today, but I absolutely have to have optionality today. And so that's what we do, is we go and talk with, we're helping companies do preliminary engineering on multiple sectors on projects. And then ultimately we'll be partnering with those companies as they move into FEED and FID to manage their CCS operations.
FID.
That's right. Funding. So financing the project. So from front-end engineering into where the project has been funded and then can be built, and into operations. And so we saddle up next to companies, acting as their partner for CCS right through the life cycle. That's what we do. And our solution's always on site, where we're looking at, hey, let's do it here if we can. And so many places in the U.S., you can do it right beneath you. And so that's a value opportunity that we try and bring to our client partners, because otherwise pipeline solutions have their place, and I don't begrudge at all the myriad pipeline solutions where pipeline operators collect CO2 along a pipeline and take it away to a large-scale storage site. That's a good option in many places too, but so many of our emitters, our emitting facilities, aren't right next to a right-of-way for a CO2 line. So are they out of luck? And we'd like to say, no, I don't think so. I think in a lot of the United States, they can take the problem we can help them take the problem on themselves rather than sort of waiting for someone to build something nearby.
Is there a project or a company that you're not working with that you've seen in the news recently in the last 12 months? You're like, man, that's great. I like to see this. Is there something that you are encouraged by?
Yeah. Well, so the project that, and not a lot of it's been released on the sequestration side, so I'm not privy to what it is, but the CF Industries Donaldsonville blue ammonia project in Louisiana is a terrific example of how, I think, of how big companies can do something significant in the current environment, and they're up and as far as is publicly available, they're up and running with that, and they're decarbonizing their facility, and they're providing a low carbon fuel to whoever their customers end up being. They have an off-site solution, as I understand it, where they'll be taking their CO2 elsewhere. Great project, great scale, and that's the kind of thing I think we can see more of on the large scale. The smaller scale, I mentioned 2 existing CCS projects. The one I didn't work on, the Decatur one, is a great example of a single facility with a high CO2 stream they're doing exactly what we're helping folks do, which is put it right underneath them, put it away. It's clean. It's as in a simple solution.
Decatur, I'm assuming that's Decatur, Texas.
Decatur, Illinois.
Okay, so I was wrong.
Decatur, Illinois.
So what makes Decatur, Illinois' geography so great for them to be able to do that?
So that's where they're not blessed with Gulf Coast type geology, right, but they have the sufficient geology to put away their project volumes right on site. So that's where I think a lot of, because the press is around mega projects, Air Products mega project, and ExxonMobil has a mega project planned on the Texas side, and where you're collecting volumes from many emitters, and it's hundreds, it's tens of.
You're talking about the project on the Ship Channel, the proposed,
yeah. And so these are very large projects, and they require massive geologic sort of sinks to allow them to do it at that scale, but if you look at an individual project, an individual site, where you're emitting 600,000 tons per annum or 1.8 million tons per annum, these are kind of average numbers for bigger projects. That you don't need anything like the geologic blessing that the Gulf Coast has to do that right underneath you. And so what's great about CCS, I think there's the mega projects have their place, and they can do that efficient collecting of CO2. And right. But it's not just for the big, and it's not just for the folks that are blessed to be right next to a pipeline. So much of the U.S., 60% of the U.S. or more, there's geologic sites that are suitable for project scale volume right underneath them.
So you could see there could be a world 20 years from now where these facilities, a power plant, for example, is burying their waste right there on site.
Yes.
In most, like you said, 60% of the United States.
I think you can absolutely do that in many cases. Go right underneath, and that because when it's 60% of the land area, it's a much higher percent of the emissions, because the emissions are congregated around Gulf Coast, and
right.
There's places on the East Coast and the West Coast and the Midwest where you have this sort of collation of emission sites. Most of those have access to geologic formations where on a site-by-site basis they could actually deal with their emissions right there, which is why I think the IRA is such an important piece of legislation, because it does open up for so much of the country. There's suddenly emitters have an option. They've got a viable option. They don't have to be near a pipeline, and they don't have to go underwater to seriously consider decarbonizing the CCS. So.
So I'm obviously a policy guy, and I ask you this question: so speaking of policy, IRA obviously passed, increases the 45Q. If you're sitting down with Senator Manchin, what else does the industry need? I mean, obviously, financing is always important, but what else? What would you tell him? Okay, what's the next step when you're looking at an energy package next Congress? What else do you really need to really get this going if you really want to kickstart a lot of these projects?
I'm with that would have been a long answer 3 weeks ago.
Right.
I actually, personally, I think that the federal government right now, the past and current, in getting us to this point, they have ponied up. Mm-hmm. I really do think that if they execute as planned, as promised, then this is the ball's in the private sector's court. Okay. And up till this point, I think it hasn't been. It's been primarily, hey, ball's in policymakers' court because in our economy we can't make this work. Right. But if you want the private sector to drive investment, as I think we do in this country, we want the private sector to drive it. We like the efficiency associated with that approach, and I think that's great. I think they've said over to you, industry.
So the football's been handed off to you. Now you got to run with it. That's what you're saying.
From like 2016 to now, you're saying it kind of got started and then just kaboom in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, because the move from 50 to 85 just opens it up from a tiny subset to not everybody, but a large subset. So I wouldn't necessarily go to the policymakers and say, hey, you need to make it work for everybody. I would say, hey, you've given everybody enough impetus. Right. It's time for the private sector to go make the most of that and see where you run into roadblocks and then relook at policy. But right now, I think over to you. Let's go get after it. And I think the one area where they could help is making sure that we don't gum things up with permitting.
Right, permitting's I always hear it's a big concern.
But they've done all the work needed as long as they can facilitate the appropriate speed of permitting. Then it's, hey, go get after it.
So you're bullish. Do you think if we were having this conversation a year from now, there would be a whole list of projects going on with multiple companies in the field? Is that what we're going to see in a year or 2 years?
I'll be confused if there isn't.
Yeah,
I will. Okay. I just think that this works for enough places that you would fully, and the sentiment, both the societal expectation, the overlay of the regulatory expectations increasing, that you do something, and the company's own sense of corporate citizenship, all of those are lining up to action. Now that the incentives are there, I really do expect that in the next 12 months, it takes a while to get glue them together. Mm-hmm. But I would expect 12 months from now, if we're talking, that we'd be saying, hey, it's not 30 Class 6 well permits the EPA has in hand. It's 300, or
right.
It's a multiple.
Right.
Well, he just gave us another great idea. We're going to have him back on in a year, because I want to hear a lot of this stuff is so new that we do need to benchmark the progress, right? I mean, because I'll be confused is a great way of saying, what held it up? Was it, the shackles are off at some level? So is it government that held us up? Is it did we get in our own way? What was it, right? I'd like to know, because we've been getting yelled at. We've been yelling at each other long enough to where if we don't start making these moves, then whose fault is it really?
Yeah. And I think, back to your original comment about the affinity for and connection that we have, all of us in the room, with the energy sector, the upstream oil and gas and the energy sector, I think this is really good news for the energy sector, because the oil and gas industry has all of the tools to help. Mm-hmm. And so how folks, if you make cement, this is not in your wheelhouse. You now have an incentive, you have the will, you'll have access to the capital, but you won't have access to the skill sets. So that's where I would expect oil and gas professionals and oil and gas companies. This is where the industry can really participate and really make a difference, and it's a whole new business line for upstream oil and gas that's just opening up now.
I don't understand. What do you mean by that? It's not in your wheelhouse. You mean the construction of?
The CCS is common technology. Nothing about it that we're waiting on. But if you don't know how to manage sequestration properly, then you're not able to execute a project. So that subsurface management is unique to upstream oil and gas.
I got what you're saying. So you're saying it's right now it can be another business line for somebody has that expertise.
If you have subsurface expertise and capability, then it's a short hop, skip, and a jump from managing the depletion of a reservoir to managing the injection of CO2.
Are we talking about that at all?
We are. I mean, that's what you got to remind policymakers, and you got to make it real simple for them. You say, hey, if you're drilling holes in the ground, who do you want to talk to? Who knows how to drill holes in the ground and manage those holes and injection? But it is important because it's really the knowledge base that we already have that can move into this new.
Well, see, so I don't mind sounding a little dumb on this here. I mean, are we telling the oil and gas people that story as well? That there's a lot of, because I always hear one of the things you said early on was there's some retraining, and I hear that, and I know that scares people, right? Change scares people just generally. But I wonder if we are explaining it to the point of like, look, here's the change we're talking about. It's not, you don't have to go learn some skill set you've never heard of, you've never seen. Like it's really not that far away, and it's also going to be a long-term, viable, both current and future strategy for your life and career. Like, are we telling that? I don't mean to kind of hijack the moment here, but like, are we telling that story to our people? Yeah,
I think it's a fair question. I think that story needs to be told, and specifically when you're talking about the CCS technology, you need to also remind traditional oil and gas that this could potentially extend the oil and gas infrastructure for decades, 100 years, because it's going to make you able to do all these projects with very, very low carbon. So it's a good story for everybody all around, and I think you're right. Josh. You need to tell it.
Right. All right. Well,
and I don't know what this may be a little controversial. I don't intend it to be, but I just think the reality is that it's very sensitive as you well know, when to say, hey, great news, we're extending oil and gas life infrastructure, and I think that in some cases that will be true, but oil and gas infrastructure from an investment perspective is put in with such a long life cycle in mind.
Yep.
What we're really doing is that stuff's going to run. Mm-hmm. So that and I think if I were talking to someone who took exception to CCS on the grounds that you're just trying to figure out a way to keep the oil industry going, I think I would flip it on its head and say, no, the oil industry is going to be going. So the question is, do you want to do it well, or do you want to do it poorly?
Yeah.
And we're not extending oil infrastructure where otherwise it would disappear, because the energy requirement's going to continue to be there.
Right.
It's simply that we're going to do it well.
Right.
And that I think is more palatable to those on the side of the fence that say this is all just an oil and gas play to get your dirty industry to stay solvent. And it's like, no. It's a fact. It's going to be here. It has to be, because we care about people first. And when we care about people first, we know we have to have lights on, we have to have heating, we have to have all the things that make the world work. And so the infrastructure will be here, but we can do it better.
Yeah.
And now we in the U.S. With the fiscal policy framework that's set up, we can really do it well.
I love it. I think it's a cool I like that little bit at the end. I want to explore that maybe further too, to just find out, again, as we talked off camera, it's how does this, and I think you summed it up very, we care about people first, and the widget matters, but how does that affect someone's life, and what difference will that make in someone's life? And if we can't explain that, then then we're not doing our job properly, right? And it's really, then we should be, then in 1 year we will be getting yelled at for why haven't we done anything? Right. You know what I mean? Really, if we're not doing our job, then we're not doing our job, and this is a part of our job. So,
well, in Europe, for instance, that you were talking about this earlier, Tim, about the, in Europe, what shift might we see? And I think it's when we're talking about the politics of the shift rather than the driver for the shift, it gets messy. So we want folks on the far left to support the extension of oil infrastructure. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, no. The people on the far left and the far right and everybody in between can look at a family that's going to be cold this winter and say, that's not okay. So what do we do in the next 2 to 5 years to make this different? Well, you've got to act quickly. You've got to be very pragmatic. And then it's not political. Then the driver is clear. It's like, we're not trying to, this isn't extending one industry over another. It's simply saying, how do we do the appropriate things needed to take care of folks who need energy? And that, then it's nothing's depoliticized, but it kind of makes, I'm saddened when we go, when it's described in political terms what's trying to be done, because this is, depending on, it's a world scale issue that we're trying to address, and we're trying to address it because in the end we care about people, and so that's the fundamental driver for all of it. Is this is bad for people and bad for our environment, our home, our planet. So how do we take care of it? Let's find the right practical ways to do that, and I think that's a more powerful, because it's a more it's a more visceral rationale than the political action and whose politics does it better line up with. It's like, gosh, if we talk about that, you're going to miss the whole point and we'll make bad decisions.
Are you from Houston?
No.
Where are you from?
That's a longer. I was born in Australia. I lived in California. Then I've been in Texas 20 years, so I call Texas home. Yeah. It's definitely my home, but I'm not a native Texan.
Have you been in Houston for 20 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you enjoying your role on the council, the coalition, I should say?
Oh yeah. I like, for the reasons you just described. This is the most fun I've ever had in my career, because the opportunity to make things different, better, and see the kind of movement that we're seeing. This is a fast-moving space, and to be able to be involved in the CNC and have a small part to play in influencing how policymakers could further enhance, make things better for people. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what they, in theory, that's what I think most of them went into office to do. So that's kind of exciting to get to be able to.
What is the website for the Carbon Neutral Coalition? Do you know that off the top of your head? It might be actually up on the screen. Is that up there, Luke?
No, that's.
That's your website.
No, yeah, that's mine. I don't off the top of my head, and we need to.
Yeah, well, he'll have it up there in just a second. So, real quick, what's your website for Cozairo?
For Cozairo's website is www. You're good. That's all right. So, now that
Cozairo.
Now that you know the origin, you don't have to say it right. We know what it is. It's a www.cozairo.com is ours.
All right. And is there anything that you would like to? I mean, we're going to have the website here for the Carbon Neutral Coalition as well. Is there anything else you want to make sure people go visit before we jump off here?
I think I'd love to see them get familiar with what the Carbon Neutral Coalition's doing, and I would also love for folks to reach out to us at Cozairo if there's an opportunity for us to help them. So I think we are really excited about the conversations we're already having. And I think the Carbon Neutral Coalition's doing great work. 2023 is going to be big for us. So.
You see it up there? It's behind me. Tim, what's that say?
It just went off.
It is the carbonneutralcoalition.com.
There we go. There we go.
You know, it's funny. David DeRode and I host another podcast, and he would always, he'd come on, he'd say WWW, and he'd tell whatever podcast, and our producer would in the back, he'd say, "Look, you're letting everybody know you're old when you say WWW." So anytime
That's a great point. Can we edit that out?
Yeah.
I am old, but I don't. There's no point volunteering.
Yeah, no. It's always funny to me. I used to do the same, like www.
And they're like, "Duh." How else would we get there?
It's
right?
so funny. And
well, my first email address was a .AOL.
There you go.
Yes.
People still use AOL. It's crazy. Anytime
know.
I get one of those, I'm like, "Come on, man, come on."
Yep.
I remember giving a Josh Lowry at hotmail.com and in college, and the girl thought I was being rude. She's like, "Oh, Hotmail," and I'm like, "No,
it's a thing.
Hotmail, MAIL." And that's how long, that's
okay.
how
I remember
unfamiliar Hotmail was back in the day. That's how old I am. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, it has been great having you on.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun to talk with you.
What did you
both.
think of your first podcast experience?
That was a blast. Actually, really enjoyed the conversation. So,
And
thanks for having me.
Mr. Tarpley's playing a little bit injured. I mean, you feeling okay? I mean, you sounded you came in, you sounded a little stopped up, but you clicked in.
Ready to rock and roll.
Ready to roll.
Yeah.
A
Pro.
gamer, 100%. Stepped in for
Pro.
Leslie's on a bit of a sabbatical. She's been working a lot, so thanks for coming in. How did you
Anytime.
enjoy the co-hosting duties today?
Enjoyed it. Always enjoy talking about policy and energy. I mean, I think CCUS is exciting. I mean, I get excited about a lot of this stuff, but I really think CCUS has got a tremendous opportunity, especially now we've got the government was supporting it. So I'm bullish as well. And I mean, when you have a technology that you have folks on the Republicans and Democrats can agree on. I think that's a win right there.
Absolutely.
I mean, they can't agree on anything anymore. But CCUS does seem to have a bipartisan support, and that's rare these days. So,
well, truly, we wish you the best of luck. We're going to put on our calendar to have you back in a year.
Great.
And I'd like to just get an update on this stuff.
Love to.
Um,
And I'd love to not be embarrassed by coming back and telling you that it did explode just like we thought it would.
It will.
But
It
we'll,
will. I mean, passion
let you know.
carries the day.
I think so.
And it sounds like you are full of it, and it sounds like just there's a mission. And it's more fun to run with a mission than there is just for profits. I mean, profits, you run out of energy on profits.
Wow, did you read this? That's what what we say at Cozairo is, hey, we are mission and value driven. We're profit conscious, but we're mission and value driven because it's a lot more fun
I will
to work
give
that
you
way.
one hint. I didn't make any of these notes. I'll give you one hint if I actually read that on your website. No, I didn't. But
Sweet.
I love it. I do love it.
Well, then it was a great setup because that's why we're having so much fun. I think is because there's a lot more to it than just checking your balance sheet every quarter.
How did we get a hold of you, by the way? Leslie grabbed you and pulled you into this?
Yeah, through the was it Lauren was who I was working with in there. So Carbon Neutral Coalition has a group that kind of manages both their PA, their public affairs, and also helps with some of the work they do in Austin.
Okay.
And so they had, I think, linked us up.
Tell Lauren thank you. This was a good get. And Leslie, by the way, she'll be listening to this, we appreciate her connecting us with this too. So great guest. We've done a lot of these, and I can tell you're going to win, so we appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for the time. Great to meet you both.
Okay.
excellent.
Anything for you, Tim? Last bit?
Appreciate stopping by. Always happy to come by.
All right, well, that'll
Anytime.
wrap us up here. Thank you for joining us today on the Energy and Transition Podcast. If you have any questions, complaints, again, you can send them to me. I won't read the complaints. I will read the good mail. I can somehow decipher between the two pretty quickly. Look us up on all our social media. We are on everything from LinkedIn to Instagram. If you have anything that you need, contact Sarah at uprightdigital.com, and we'll go from there. Have a great day.